Gentlemen, good to see you this afternoon. As we have continued in this theme of reflecting on the sermon from the week before, we are starting what will be a five-part series where we'll get to rethinking suffering. Pastor Keith, this is the one of the questions that you asked has struck me. The one question where you asked us to imagine or to think about the suffering of our friends. And the follow-up was, is that fair? Just the thought of imagining, and not even imagining, remembering the many people who call Keystone home and the specific particular suffering that I know that they're enduring as elders are praying for these people. What struck me is the illustrations you used about losing a child or being paralyzed. They don't mean as much to me. But the second I remember the suffering of someone I know and the story that they have, oh man, I end up feeling a heavier weight and feeling much more empathy and compassion because I know the people. And so I would imagine that during this series, there are going to be people at Keystone who have intense feelings and are looking to process this far more than maybe another. It's going to be very practical and real. And so I'm interested in hearing how the sermon is striking you guys so far. Charlie, why don't we start with you?
All right. In my counseling ministry work, obviously, I talk to people who are suffering. I can't remember anyone asking to meet with me because their life is so easy. So when I go into counseling, biblical counseling, it typically follows 4 steps. We talk about their suffering. We talk about their reaction to the suffering. We see what that tells us about their heart. And then fourth, we then apply the gospel to their particular heart issues. This can lead us to the misunderstanding that once we learn what God is trying to teach us through a particular suffering, the suffering will end and we can go on with a easy peasy life. Keith, I loved what you said toward the end of your message, something like suffering is not a single lesson, it's a curriculum. This could be discouraging, but as we see in Hebrews 12:6, God disciplines us as his children out of his love for us. The curriculum is a lifelong process to shape us into the image of Christ. This helps me to have a positive attitude towards suffering because I see a purpose in it.
Yeah, we'll end up touching on that, I think, in 2 weeks, right, Keith, with the Craftsman's Wrath. Mm-hmm. Kyle, how about you? How's the sermon striking you?
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to process this in like 2 minutes. Bree and I were talking on Sunday during the sermon, and Bree was like, wow, Keith's really hitting on a lot this morning with this first one, which is true. I felt like, man, there was a lot of good stuff and a lot of things in there to process, Keith. I think the one thing for me is just the idea that we so desperately want to make sense of our suffering, or at least I feel that way. And I think on the one hand, you presented, Keith, with like, we can make sense of it in the big story: paradise given, paradise lost, paradise restored. We're in paradise lost. And so we can understand our suffering from a big perspective, but we also want to make sense of it of like, why, give me the exact reason this is happening here. Show me the exact lesson show me exactly what good's going to come from this. And I think I just think of it, if I can make sense of this, this will be easier. And I think that's why we asked. I thought those questions you had were great. The 5 questions we asked. We ask those questions, I think, sometimes to try to, I want the exact answer. And then also, I think sometimes we give bad comfort to other people because we want to help them make sense. We offer them, where you said, that false hope of, well, it'll get better. Here's what's going to come from it, because we want to help them make sense when maybe there isn't that simple, easy answer most of the time.
Keith, how was the first message? Maybe what was going through your mind with the first one to set us up for the rest of the series?
The main thing that was going through my mind is I'm afraid that some Christians are going to say, this is bleak. In other words, to lay out such a panorama of uh, this is always going to be with us. Suffering is always going to be with us until they lay our heads down in the casket. But I think that unless we get that foundation, all we can do is spend our lives trying to focused on breaking out of suffering, correcting whatever is wrong. And I don't know how many, I kind of moved past it quickly, but I don't know how many people caught that statement by Paul's in Romans 8. This curse came from God. This curse came from God. And for me anyway, maybe people would think this was weird, but that reassures me. That means that I'm in the midst of difficulties that are not primarily driven by Satan, but both driven by God, and I'm consoled in the midst of it by God, and I'm helped in the midst of it by God. I am overwhelmed by the number of Christians that I hear, whether it's in books I read. I'll probably share something on Sunday I just heard the other night, where people are Christians are doing their best to strip God of all responsibility of suffering. And to me, it's counterproductive. It's not true. And two, it doesn't bring the hope that I think people want it to bring.
Yeah. That Romans 8 passage really is such maybe you said the best chapter in the Bible. All of creation was subjected to futility in hope. So who is the one who's possible to subject creation to futility in hope? I can't subject creation to futility. Satan doesn't do it in hope. God does it in hope that we might be set free from our bondage to decay. So Keith, I'm looking forward to next week or this coming Sunday, where you'll end up giving us some ideas of how should we view suffering? Even if it has good, should we embrace it? Should we just try to get through it and endure it? What should we do? So looking forward to hearing from you on Sunday. If you have questions that you would love the four of us to be able to engage with regarding the topic, I would encourage you, after you watch this video, if you want to comment in the section below, or after you watch Sunday's sermon, if you want to comment in the streaming chat feature with questions, one of the hosts there will relay those questions to us so that we can end up interacting with some of your feedback. But we'll look forward to doing this again next time. Gentlemen, thanks again. I'll see you in a bit.